And now coming up next, be careful what you wish for. So this girl Samantha Bird, she's clumsy, she's unnaturally tall, and nobody likes her. And then Judith, who's on our basketball team, she's always saying, "Fly away, bird," like she thinks that she's saying something cool, I guess. And then Samantha comes across Clarissa, a gypsy who's able to grant wishes. And then it kind of unfolds into a monkey's paw story, where the wish is granted in the worst possible way. I think her first wish is that she wants to be the strongest player on the basketball team. She is, but she doesn't get any better. It's just that everyone else gets worse. And so then there are other wishes that just, again, monkey's paw concept. Until finally, she's so unsatisfied with her wishes, Clarissa says, "Well, I'll grant you a fourth one anyway." Clarissa says, "I wish I had never met you. I wish you had met Judith." And so then Clarissa goes, she meets Judith, everything's returned to normal. And she goes, meets Judith, and then Judith wishes that Samantha would fly away. And so then Samantha Bird is now a bird. So it seems that, you know, Clarissa's just out to get Samantha. She's willing to grant everybody else's wishes just fine. But when it comes to Samantha, no, Samantha's got to have the whole monkey's paw thing going on. The story itself is not too bad, but again, not too good. There's a lot of those, I think. It's kind of frustrating almost that Samantha is. It talks about how she's so careful with her words. She's wording her wish so carefully, and then she just ruins it at the last second. And so, not a bad story. It's just, I think it could have been better. And now, next up is the Cuckoo Clock of Doom. Honestly, I think that the synopsis on the back was scarier than the book. Michael's sister Tara, worst little sister in the world. She's always like destroying his stuff. She's tripping him. Worst sister in the world. So then Michael's like, I always get blamed for this, so I want her to be blamed for something. I want to get her into serious trouble. So their father brings home a cuckoo clock, which is the Cuckoo Clock of Doom, and he says, don't touch it. And then late one night, he hears his dad talking to Tara, screaming at her like, "Why did you touch this clock? If I find anything broken on this clock, you're in big trouble." So then Michael's like, "Perfect." He says, "I can go mess with the clock, and then I can blame it on Tara." He decides he's going to go down there and mess with the bird that comes out. So he turns the cuckoo's head, and then that sends him going backwards through time. I guess when you turn the head backwards, you move backwards. So I don't know if you move the head to the left, time goes to the left, or turn to the right, time goes to the right. So then he starts going backwards through time. He's reliving everything terrible that ever happened to him. And then he's trying to get back to his own time. But then he goes down to the cuckoo clock, and since he went back in time, the cuckoo clock isn't in his house yet. Like I said, it does have some good moments to it. And then eventually it comes to the point where he realizes Tara has just disappeared. Like we've gone back in time so far that she's been erased from existence. And I'm next. And so, yeah, it's got some good moments to it, good suspense. And you really feel for Michael too. So he's determined. Eventually, when he's like a little baby, he finally manages to get the clock and twist it back. And then that just sends him back to his own time. So his problem is solved. And then he's looking at the clock, and then he sees that the year is missing because it had a year counter on it. And it was the year that his sister Tara was born. Tara was never born because that year was missing. And I don't really know how to feel about that twist ending. He, in effect, kind of murdered his little sister, and he's okay with it. He's like, maybe I'll go back and get her. But it's it's really pretty dark. She kind of deserved it. She had it coming. This is a rather popular book in the Goosebumps series, but I found this book quite boring, actually. I do definitely see the potential that it had, and it did have some moments, some really good moments. I wanted to be there, but it just wasn't. Again, it's not a bad book, but it didn't really get me interested. And part of that is because I don't really like time travel stories. I'm just not a big fan of them. And for me to like a time travel story, it takes quite a bit. And this book, it just didn't do it for me. Despite having good moments, it also had bad moments. And I just found it quite boring. Not bad, not good. Now, next we have How I Learned to Fly. So it starts off with our protagonist, Jack. He and Wilson fight over everything, and Jack always loses. They're always competing, and then Wilson takes it every time. There's this girl, Mia, that Jack has a huge crush on, but so does Wilson, and of course, Wilson is always one-upping Jack, so Jack feels just totally bummed out all the time. Everything that he tries to do, Wilson beats him every time. So one day he's at Mia's party, and I think he gets Mia an album of her favorite band, and then Wilson gets her tickets to her favorite band. Jack feels like he's been one-upped again, and so he runs out of the party, and he finds this abandoned house on the beach that he hides in because Mia goes out to chase him. So he hides in this house. He finds a book called Flying Lessons. He says, hey, why not? Might be kind of cool. So he mixes up this dough. His dog eats it first. And the dog starts to float away up into the air. He eats it. He goes and catches the dog. And then he eventually learns how to control it. He knows how to fly, really. And so then he's like, I bet that I could finally beat Wilson like this. But wouldn't you know it, Wilson knows how to fly too. He gets a hold of the gunk and he eats some of it, and now Wilson knows how to fly. So then it gets into some really heavy stuff. Like, the government takes Jack and starts doing tests on him and all this sort of stuff. He becomes a celebrity, and then he realizes that all he really wants is just to be a normal kid. He wants to avoid all the paparazzi. Everyone's like asking him to star in movies and commercials, TV shows, whatever. And he finally just wants to get away from it. And so then a race is set up between Jack and Wilson, the two people who now know how to fly. And so then, unbeknownst to the reader at this point, Jack decides, I'm not going to fly. I'm going to make the entire world think that I forgot how to fly, that I can't fly anymore. And so he kind of jumps up and falls back down to the ground. Wilson just takes off soaring. And so then, everyone is all like, oh, Wilson. But it turns out that Jack really did win this time because he's living his normal life. He probably got the girl in the end too, Mia there. She was drooling all over him in the book. She was laying it on thick. But yeah, so then he gets away from the paparazzi, lives his normal life, and he does still know how to fly. And then I think he says something like, I like to go fly at night sometimes when I'm all alone or something like that. Now, I thought that this was a very charming story with a couple of suspenseful moments to it. But at the same time, as a horror story, it kind of was not a good horror story. But again, I did like the story. It's just that as a Goosebumps book, it was kind of lame. So I kind of ranked it as high as I dared to and then as low as I dared to for those reasons. And now next we have My Hairiest Adventure. So Larry is in a garage band. It's Larry, Lily, Manny, Kristen or Christina, and Jared. And so they're preparing for the Battle of the Bands. After their rehearsal one day, Larry finds this bottle of instant tan lotion called Instatan. So then they all say, "Hey, why don't we look really good for our Battle of the Bands audition? We'll all rub it on ourselves and get really tan." And they say, "Wait, but it's expired. It's expired by several years." The date on the bottle was 1991, and this came out in 1994. So in the context of the book, it's expired by at least 3 years. They rub the instant tan on themselves, and then no big deal. They don't really get tan because it's expired. And then Larry starts to notice he's growing hair where he applied the tanning lotion. And there's some honestly very, very, very awkward dialogue in this book. He's like, "Hey, are you growing hair?" Yeah, so he's got hair growing, and then he tries to shave it off. It keeps growing back, and he keeps shaving, keeps coming back. Eventually, he notices that his friends start to disappear. They can't find him anywhere. Their parents, everyone is gone. So he tries to talk to them, and he says, "Hey, where is, say, Lily?" Because Lily eventually ends up vanishing too. They say, "Well, there is no Lily. Don't worry about it." And then he finds a dog that looks like Lily. It's got her same two colored eyes. I think one is blue and one is green or something. And Lily always wears this necklace. So then he comes across a dog with two different colored eyes and this necklace, this medallion that Lily always wears. He kind of connects the dots. It's like, my friends are turning into dogs. He's all freaking out. He's thinking, "Oh my gosh, they're turning into dogs." Eventually, he turns into a dog, and that's the big twist ending, is that it wasn't the lotion's fault. It was that they were actually dogs all along, and after 12 years old, their shots that this suspicious doctor gives them, they just don't work anymore. And so that's kind of a brief synopsis of the book. There are more details, but that's generally what happens. I found this book strangely likable. I thought that Larry was a good protagonist. I thought Lily was a good protagonist. The twist ending, though, it is kind of lame, I think. The story itself and like how you see like Larry's reaction to, "I'm growing hair. How do I stop it? What do I do?" And I think that it made for, honestly, a quite entertaining story. Mind you, not all that great of a story, but still, I liked it, honestly. Next up is The Girl Who Cried Monster. So, Lucy's been torturing her family with monster stories. Nobody believes her anymore. And then her librarian, Mr. Mortman, really is a monster. He eats flies, eats turtles, eats all sorts of other little animals. Kind of sickening imagery that's used in the book. And then it describes how he transforms into the monster, like his eyes sprout out of his head, and there is some disturbing, unsettling imagery in this book. The first part of the plot, it kind of wears itself out. Like she goes to her reading program with Mr. Mortman. She leaves her rollerblades, and so she walks back in. That's when she discovers that Mr. Mortman, the librarian, really is a monster. And then so she runs out, and then she's like, "Oh, but I forgot my rollerblades still. I'm gonna go back in and get it." And it, like that, it just that kind of thing happens a few different times in this book. Not many, but just where Lucy has to go back into the library and whatever. It's like she gets amnesia every time she sees the monster or something. Eventually, the monster sees her. So the monster looks at her, knows who she is, and has to go after her. There's one part where she's actually following Mr. Mortman home, which is like, why are you doing that? It does build some creepiness. It really does. When they get further into the story, Mr. Mortman, he's trying harder and harder to get Lucy. He brings her backpack home, says, "You left this in my library." And she's like, "Oh yeah, just leave it on the porch over there." And so some really creepy and unsettling moments in this book. But then there's the part where the parents, they know Mr. Mortman, and so they invite him over for dinner. Naturally, nobody believes Lucy when she says, "Oh my gosh, Mr. Mortman's a monster." Yeah, no one believes her. It's the boy who cried wolf, but it's the girl who cried monster. And so Lucy's parents say, "Hey, why don't you come to our house for dinner?" Mr. Mormon says, "Yeah, sure." So then, like, the monster is in her house. And so then he's all like, "Yeah, so what's for dinner?" And then, twist ending of the book, they look to Mr. Mortman and say, "You are." And they eat Mr. Mortman. Yeah, that's really the book. As I said a few times now, this book had some very creepy moments to it. I think that if I was to read this as a kid, I would be super scared of my librarian. Even though as a kid, my librarian was a little old lady. The book is somewhat likable and somewhat dislikable. There are a lot of things that kind of seem to drag, and some events that just honestly seem pretty pointless. But it's not a bad read, not at all, not at all. I would say this book was pretty mediocre.